Hello YouTube! Today I'm going to be reviewing the channel House of Hypertrophy. For those of you who don't know what the page is about, it's essentially a science-based, fitness-related page that aims to teach people the best method to be big, aka the science of hypertrophy. And for those of you who have been recommended the page because recently the algorithm has taken a liking to it, you already know what I'm talking about. The reason why I wanted to review the page is because one, it has hypertrophy in the title, and when I saw House of Hypertrophy, I thought, that's my house, I want to see what that's about. And then I saw it was about science, and as you know, I have a conflicted relationship with science on YouTube Fitness. So I thought this could be interesting, especially because the page is getting popular, many people take advice from it, and I wanted to see if the page was giving good advice, if it was going to lead people to becoming bigger, or if it was just bogus. But before this video starts proper, I want to offer a small disclaimer for House of Hypertrophy if they end up watching this video. I'm going to be using some of your content to illustrate my points. That is protected by fair use. Please do not take this video down. If you do, I'm going to have to take you to court, something I've done in the past and won every single time because fair use is protected by Article 107 in the United States. So don't waste my time, please. I'm not doing this maliciously. It's just because I want to show what you're doing to be able to offer a correct criticism of it. So let's get started. What we're going to talk about today in this review is why the page got popular in the first place, what it's doing right, what it's doing wrong, and how you, if you follow House of Hypertrophy, can make the best gains from it and the best way to approach the information that is offered to you. So in terms of popularity, the reason why I want to open with it and why it is the bulk of my argument is because I believe that the rise of this channel in particular is symptomatic of a greater trend on YouTube Fitness. And that is the trend of science-based channel. The most popular nowadays, they tend to grow extremely fast. And therefore, the whole of fitness is morphing into a more empirical one, whereas in the past, it was more about personal experience and anecdotal evidence. And I believe the reason why we are witnessing this shift is because people more and more want the ability to be certain that the advice they receive is going to work. Nowadays, people don't want to take chances. They don't want to have to guess. They want to have the certitude that if they listen to advice that is going to get them a bigger chest, it's actually going to get them a bigger chest. And it didn't used to be the case. There used to be a time where people took chances. And I think the reason why people don't want to do that anymore is because they have been fed so much contradicting information for so many years that they are fed up with it. So many YouTubers that tell them different things, different versions of the truth. I have people in my comments asking me all the time, hey, you say this, but this guy said that. Who should I believe? Why should I believe you? They can't decipher between bullshit and the truth because they're novices for the most part, and therefore they want the ability to be able to trust someone. But it's impossible to trust fitness YouTubers because they lie all the time. It's what I call the post-trust era. You cannot trust the people you receive information from. And therefore, it is only natural that people would turn towards science because science is not someone. And as we all know, science is infallible. It is not going to betray you. Every single study tells the truth, yada, yada, yada. That is common mindset that occupies YouTube Fitness and why these pages are extremely popular. So as a result, advice based on studies appears to be a more valuable source of information since it appears to people that it is based on a scientific consensus. Of course, a study can be peer-reviewed, a study can be done by multiple people at once, there can be multiple studies, and House of Hypertrophy has understood that. They utilize multiple studies, they cross studies, and therefore, when you take advice from one of their videos, you're not taking advice from one guy, you're taking advice from a lot of people, and the information is gathered together to create something that goes in the same direction. Things corroborate one another, and therefore it is much easier to put your trust in that. So that is one of the explanation. But there is also the fact that people want to be told what to think and what to do. It's not enough to have the ability to know that what you're going to follow is going to work. You need to have a blueprint. You need to be guided throughout the entire process. This also limits the risk of mistakes, especially if you take advice from a source that cannot create or produce mistakes. This is another comforting aspect of the page House of Hypertrophy. You feel like you're taking quality advice from a source that is not going to fail you, and on top of that, it is complete. You're getting complete advice. Now, this could be also construed as a bad thing because, again, it shows that people lack critical thinking skills. But I don't want you to think that I'm blaming the responsibility for this on Science-Based Channel or House of Hypertrophy. This is an old thing. People have always functioned like this. And this is why, typically on YouTube, the channels that do the best, that attract the most people, are what I call authoritarian fitness channels. These are channels where the guy is going to tell you, hey, you do this, this is what works, and the rest is bullshit. It's absolute, it's completely black and white. You, on this page, of course, hate that, but the majority of people absolutely love it, especially novices. Novices want the ability to scope down on one small portion of fitness and only focus on that. And they want the ability to know for a fact that they're not missing out, that the rest of what they're ignoring is not going to give them gains, that it's stupid. It's why many big pages that don't rely on science also apply the same principles. They'll tell you that it's their way or the highway. The only way to get big is their method. Whereas people like me who are more nuanced in their approach are going to tell you that I have some solutions, but not all solutions, and they might not apply to you. It means that people now have to think, they have to choose for themselves, and it's not something that they want. So outside of that, you have your two types of authoritarian fitness channels. The first one being the paternalist, muscle-bound PED user. Just with me saying that, you already have people that are popping up in your head. You know exactly who I'm talking about. The guy that is going to talk down to the audience, that is going to speak to you as if you were his son, as if he was superior to you. That is extremely appealing because these individuals have perfectly understood that if they speak from a position of authority, they are going to gather people who are craving that authority, craving someone to direct them in life, to direct their fitness journey. And for the most part, this authority relies on their physique because they're big, and also on their personal experience. And that personal experience then leads to bro science because they're going to spout things that they cannot back up with empirical evidence. It's so anecdotal, nothing wrong with that. And also gimmicks. These types are also extremely prone to developing gimmicks that also align with this ability to sell a new method, something that people have never heard about, that excites desire, that creates exclusivity and the feeling of belonging to a group, and then also leads to the ability to reject everything that is not the gimmick and claim that the rest is just bullshit. So that is the experience-based authoritarian fitness channel, and then you have ones like House of Hypertrophy that are based on a scientific voice. A scientific voice that I have remarked is usually disconnected from a body. Just like with House of Hypertrophy, the speaker doesn't show his face. He's just a disincarnated voice that is going to be put on top of images, infographics, etc., etc. It shows a clear difference with the previous category I described. Previous category that needed the ability to showcase a body and physique to be relevant, because if you're going to speak off of personal experience, you need to show the fruits and results of personal experience, even if they don't actually correlate with what you look like because you are on PEDs. Whereas if you use the scientific voice, that is not needed because the proof is in the theory and is in the verification of the theory by peers, which also allows people who don't lift to have fitness channels that teach people how to lift. I find this a little bit paradoxical and concerning because it means that you can put fitness in the hands of anyone, even a guy who technically doesn't know the application of the theory he spouts. I don't know what House of Hypertrophy is in real life, if he is buff, strong, or just a DL. It doesn't really matter, but I just wanted to point that out because it's going to become relevant as I advance in my argument. And since that voice is not going to base the advice and information they offer on personal experience, they have to base it on something else. And that something else is, of course, empirical evidence, which, by the way, is also an argument of authority. If you say push-ups are better than bench press, for example, completely random, and someone tells you why, and you say, well, because science proved it, that's an argument of authority. It doesn't even need to be right or correct. People are going to bow down to it because science is, again, a form of authority, but with different strategies. Because in this case, instead of relying on emotional factors, the emotional factors that connect you to a YouTuber whose experience you perceive and believe, we are seeing something that instead relies on factual factor. And you can decide for yourself which one is better. Some people would tell you that science is of course better because science cannot be corrupted, science cannot lie to you. Other people will tell you that the cold approach of science, the factual approach, is something they cannot rely on because it's too impersonal. All of that is depending entirely on your perception, but I will point to the fact that since science-based channels like House of Hypertrophy manage to get big off of pure information without the need to rely on a body, a face, and a personality, this must mean that the quality in itself is much higher quality, since it cannot rely on that crutch. As you know, I have an entire theory related to parasocial relationships, where I believe that once you have entered said relationship with a YouTuber, your ability to judge them and be objective pretty much disappears. Whereas this is not the case for disincarnated channels. These channels are impersonal. They do not rely on a figurehead. So you cannot fall under the charm of a person because you are just receiving pure information, which means that your judgment remains unclouded and you have a much stronger ability to perceive what is right and what is wrong. However, it isn't that simple because channels such as House of Hypertrophy also rely on seduction factors that attract the viewers and keep their attention. Even though they can't rely on the parasocial, they still have their mechanisms put in place to capture the attention of viewers and then keep them there even if the information they receive is not top quality. And this is only normal, by the way. You can't really blame science-based channels for doing that. Science by itself is extremely dry. In truth, studies don't really interest anyone. People simply don't have the time, the attention span, or the desire to ingest such information. And on top of being extremely dry, the issue with empirical evidence and studies is also that they're not accessible to laymen. They tend to be too technical, and therefore, even if you try to read it, you're not going to understand it. So it's not going to happen. And this is why channels such as House of Hypertrophy take science and cover it with sauce that is going to make it more palatable to people, that is going to allow people to actually eat it and digest it easily. Science has its authority for it, its ability to provide with hard evidence, but that's it. Science is the ugly woman that is maybe very smart and very funny, but you're not going to approach it because her face looks like a troll's behind. People like House of Hypertrophy have covered the troll in perfume and makeup to make it more approachable, and at the end of the day, everyone benefits. The troll because it attracts more people now, and also the people because they can learn from the troll. And what is that method called? What is the perfume and makeup called? Well, in technical terms, it is known as vulgarization. Vulgarization is the instance of turning highly technical information into something that is more readily intelligible. And I know that some people, some specialists, don't quite like it when their domain of interest is made accessible to plebeians. But I personally see nothing wrong with that. I just want to point out one thing. When you try to vulgarize a topic, you by default also lose some of its substance. There is absolutely no way around that. So we might deplore the portions of the information that will be lost in that process and that therefore will not be given to the audience because you have to cut the fat, but the fat is not necessarily a bad thing. It could have been important information. But between that bulk of information that would have never been given to the audience and one that is trimmed and therefore more digestible, I believe that the sacrifice of information is a worthy practice. It's a needed transformation. Exercise science, in my opinion, was developed to help the practitioners. It wasn't just a domain developed to allow scientists to jerk off to their own findings. So to see some people trying to rehabilitate the practice and put it at the heart of the community again is actually quite heartwarming. But we're going to see that it's not necessarily always what happens, and that when the transformation occurs, certain things also occur alongside it that I have to point out because they are damaging. Now that I told you what the practice and the method is called, we can discuss the methods. Because vulgarization is not just the practice of shrinking the theory and trying to make it simpler and easier to understand for people. It's also what you put around the theory, the packaging in reality that you are going to put around your content so that not only is it easier for people to comprehend, but you also make people want to actually access it. And on YouTube, of course, it's called clickability. So in the case of House of Hypertrophy, in that regard, it's quite obvious. If you've taken one look at our channel, you have seen that they put a very strong accent on identity. So it's immediately evident that you're clicking a video of their channel because their visuals are always the same. They make a strong use of infographics in their videos. So the videos are very dynamic. You're not just staring at a blank page like this. You're not just staring at a French guy talking to you. There are colors, there are movements, there are things moving. Editing is put in place, and that is an important part of it. It's part of the vulgarization in the sense that it's the marketing aspect of it. It's what it's going to make you want to actually consume that content and consume that science. It also helps with retaining your attention so that you don't click off of the video, which explains the bright colors. If you ever wondered why YouTubers employ bright colors in infographics, this is why. It's because they have a direct impact on your brain. A graphic or whatever that's moving in front of you that's black is going to retain your attention with less potency than something that is bright yellow. It's something also observed in children and fish. It's the reason why when you fish with a bait, a plastic bait, it's usually bright colors because it attracts the attention of the fish. And that is also something that is verified in their thumbnails. The thumbnails are usually a jacked body with bright colors. They took Afflinex's tendency to draw on himself with markers of bright colors, and they went the extra step, meaning that now it's not just drawing on a person, it's literally a person drawn with those colors where you can clearly see the fibers of the muscle, etc., etc. You will also see silhouettes and figures of pro bodybuilders like Arnold that are mimicked with bright colors while they're flexing. So it's the amalgamation of many practices at once. It's the showcasing of muscularity directly in the thumbnails, the bright colors, and science. It's a very powerful association, of course. And this is when we enter what I consider to be more questionable practices. Because if vulgarization per se can be pointed out as something beneficial because it helps people understand the studies and access science, this practice of, again, packaging said science only really benefits the people who push it because it just gives them more visibility. And of course, you could retort to that since science is more visible, more people can access it, and I agree with that. What I disagree with, however, is the result on people's attention because I personally believe that adding those flashy visuals only serves to retain the viewer's attention to the detriment of their focus because, unlike what you might think, all of these videos that show you these infographics are not helping you retain the information. And the proof is in the pudding. Watch one of these videos, focus on the infographics, and at the end, try to write on a piece of paper what you learned. I guarantee you, you will not retain much. Whereas, if you don't watch the visuals and you just listen to the information, like with House of Hypertrophy, you will retain the information better. But the podcast format would not make for a good marketing format, a good packaging, and therefore it is not going to be the one that is retained. So while it is impossible to state that the use of science by House of Hypertrophy is purely commercial, there is definitely an attempt at pimping science, and that is also demonstrated by the titles. I took a look at their channel. Their channel started blowing up when they started using clickbait titles. So in the past, they used more informative titles, and then they moved to things like the biggest muscle building myth ever, or the most overrated muscle building principle. This aligns perfectly with what fitness YouTubers do because at the end of the day, our number one job is to get your attention. Because if we don't get your attention, we can't speak to you. So clickbait is a normal practice. I just wanted to point out the fact that such titles are scarcely scientific. And they point to an obvious desire to market the information to the highest number of people possible. Again, there is nothing wrong with that. It is the law of YouTube. But since we're talking about a science-based channel, it must be pointed out that this strategy runs the risk of turning said science into nothing more than another marketing tool, all for the sake of getting more clicks. And this is the natural evolution of most science-based fitness channels. They start with what I perceive to be good intentions. They want to utilize science to access a higher truth. But soon enough, they realize that this higher truth gives them a position of authority that they then perverse, in my opinion, by trying to milk studies as much as possible. Because anyone who has a scientifically inclined mind knows that you can make a study say whatever you want. People don't read studies, they're not going to read the sources that you link, and therefore, any study can become a gold mine. And I sort of see that with House of Hypertrophy. When they talk about the most overrated muscle building principle, do you think you're going to click on the video and get something new, revolutionary? No, not at all. You're going to get yet another study that corroborates something that you already know. But because it is packaged as the best thing ever, it is going to become much more popular and get much more attention. And this is a hyping up of studies that I believe is dangerous, because now it's all for the sake of clicks. The scientific study does not deserve to have that visibility, and the person that makes the video knows it. They know that the information in the study is not going to be that important or that life-changing, but it does not matter at this point. What matters is the reaction it creates, and this is how you lose science. This is how science dies on YouTube Fitness, and why most channels calling themselves science-based are actually not science-based at all, because they have directly contradicted their mission statement, which was to benefit the viewer, to allow people to gain access to science they then could use in their fitness journey. But once you are stuck in the endless cycle of producing videos and trying to become bigger and more popular, you end up doing things to be popular and not things to give information to the viewer. As a result, science-based channels that existed in contradiction with emotion-based channels end up becoming just the same, because they employ the same strategies. A transformation that occurs via two mechanisms, the first one being hyperbole, so always pretending that the information you're going to present is revolutionary, that it is the best, the worst, the most overrated, something that creates an inflation of sorts, because once you have spoken about the most underrated muscle building principle, where are you going from there? You're never going to be able to top that, and therefore you have backed yourself into a corner, and next time you're going to have to be even more hyperbolic, something that science should refuse to do, because science should not prostitute itself like gimmicks do, because if it does, it becomes a gimmick. When you hype up studies, when you create a hype around studies just to get people to click, that is called a gimmick. And the second mechanism is overcomplication. You take something that is simple, aka muscle building, and you turn it into a mess of symbols and concepts that people cannot readily identify, something again that emotion-based YouTubers do all the time, because they want to keep their viewers in a state of emotional distress where they don't know where they're going. That way they have to continuously chase and seek guidance from said people, and therefore also give their clicks. If you have listened to what I said at the start, this is especially sad because science channels were supposed to simplify the vulgarization to allow the average person to gain access to it, but then through the process of clout chasing becomes the exact opposite. It spouts science, repeats studies, cycles interpretations, which leads people to continuously consume more studies, because of course, if you tell them, hey, this is the best study on muscle building, they're going to want to click because of the fear of missing out. Remember what I told you about the fear of missing out? This was an artifact that was used by emotion-based channels. And this is how science stops being an empirical practice and it becomes an emotion-based practice. This also leads to something that many people discuss nowadays, which is paralysis by analysis. When you end up with so much conflicting information that you don't really know what is right or what is wrong, and therefore you're not going to do anything because you're afraid of doing something wrong. If that rings a bell, it's because it's the exact same thing that emotion-based YouTubers have created. It's the situation that led to science-based fitness channels becoming popular, an atmosphere and environment that they then replicate by trying to becoming big themselves, by again pumping out studies and repeating themselves with different titles every time to get more clicks and more popularity every single time. Some platforms are already riddled with that type of spirit, of stock spirit. For example, Reddit. Reddit, which by the way, is in part responsible for the popularity of House of Hypertrophy. Via stats, I verified that a ton of these people's video end up being posted on certain subreddits that concern themselves with fitness science that are in reality populated by mostly small people who overthink things. The type of content produced by House of Hypertrophy just comforts them in their inaction and in their endless consumption of studies that do nothing for them. Or at the start, science was supposed to serve as a guide. You have to keep in mind when you consume that type of scientific information that it is for the most part common sense. Just because the studies contain advanced language does not mean that the topics they discuss are complicated. On House of Hypertrophy, I saw, for example, a video discussing 5x5, and the title was, "Is 5x5 the secret to muscle gains?" The answer is, of course, no, because there is almost no difference between a 5x5 and a 6x6, or a 5x4. There is nothing magical in these two numbers. But novices, of course, tend to be attracted to these titles. They tend to be attracted to these absolute practices where you're told, do 5x5 or else you won't get gains. And this is the type of spirit that needs to be broken in order to advance, in order to grow bigger. But this rigid scientific mindset tends to prevent that from occurring. It keeps people dogmatic. And when you're refusing to look outside of your comfort zone and what people tell you works, you never actually grow. It reflects what I said at the start. People are attracted to scientific channels because they want certainty. But I'm here to tell you one thing. If you want someone to be able to tell you with 100% certainty that this is the method to get big, you'll never get big because that method does not exist. Embracing uncertainty and the fact that things that you're going to try might not work is 100% of the journey. This is how most big and strong natural lifters got it done. We failed times and times again. Just because there are studies to guide you is not enough until you apply them yourself. And you will find out when you do that, you will have to modify things. That 5x5 might not work for you, that things have to be tweaked. But if you content yourself with the knowledge that this works 100%, chances are you'll never even try to apply it, and therefore you're never going to get anywhere. And this is why what I call scholar satisfaction, meaning the consuming of information instead of the production of effort, actually leads to smaller people overall. Science-based information and YouTube fitness has led to smaller people because it leads to inactive people, people who are always paralyzed, who are always only going to accept a perfect day of training, and if they can't have that perfect day, then they would rather do nothing. That type of person gets outdone by an idiot that goes to the park, tosses rocks, punches trees, and does push-ups every single time. Because on the pyramid of muscle building, the number one most important thing is not optimization, it's adherence. It's the ability to do things. Even if things are suboptimal, if you do them, they are more optimal than the optimal that is never put into action. However, I must nuance this criticism because very recently, House of Hypertrophy posted a video that was directly aimed at allowing people to step outside of the realm of theory, which is greatly appreciated and what is needed in science-based fitness channels. And in the video, they went on to discuss studies that proved that after 3 months of lifting, you got 99% of your gains, and therefore it was useless to lift more after that. This is a very common mindset. I had never heard the 3 months. I've heard people say 2 years, but it's a very dangerous black pill because if you feed that to a novice lifter, you sabotage their progression forever. Because of course, if I tell you that you're going to plateau after 3 months of training when you only get started, one, I install despair into your heart. 2, I create a self-defeating prophecy where once you get to the 3 months, you're going to think, okay, I'm done, and you're going to quit. The first sign of slowing down is going to mean the end in your head, and therefore you're going to stop. These studies are horribly dangerous, and I'm happy to see that House of Hypertrophy is standing up against them and offering hope. And I'm especially happy because at the end of the video and the message, they had a portion about the mindset. And in truth, again, the mindset is everything. I don't care about your methods if you don't have the fire and the willingness to get it done. It's all for nothing. So it shows to me that whoever makes these videos understands the danger of science-based content, something that clashes with the reproaches I had for House of Hypertrophy, where I was pointing out the fact that they were flirting with very dangerous practices to get more popular. So in conclusion, it's a mixed bag. You have to be very careful, as I said, with channels that make a use of science because it's often utilized as an argument of authority, and therefore you often turn your brain off when you consume them, when in reality, these are the videos you need to consume with your eyes open, especially if the person that produces it is slowly moving more and more towards emotion and doing away with empirical evidence. And while it seems that House of Hypertrophy is working towards keeping that empirical spirit going, one, a cynical brain, such as mine, could also point out the fact that their anti-black pill method and message could also be the result of their desire to keep people invested in their channels, because if people start to believe that you max out your gains after 3 months, they would stop consuming videos that talk about the best muscle building principle. Now, I don't want to put that devil on them. From what I have seen, most of their videos are well researched and they give good information, but I want you to keep in mind all of the facts I discussed if you are going to try and make use of the studies that they present you, because at the end of the day, these are studies you could listen to yourself, read yourself, and if you access them in their vulgarized state, you have to be aware of all of the consequences that go with it. And I'm going to leave you with that. This was the review of House of Hypertrophy. I'm thinking of reviewing other channels such as The Pioneer or Renaissance Paralysis, both channels that I know you guys also watch. If you have other names that I would like me to review, let me know and I will see you next time.